Today is a great day to learn how to manage ridiculously effective teams. Management really just is productivity as it's applied to groups. Most productivity problems are personal problems: lack of time, lack of motivation, poor decision making, low energy, not knowing how to pick a long-term outcome over a short-term outcome. Most business problems are very similar. Management stems from the need to solve these people problems and to make decisions between various trade-offs within an organization. You might be familiar with the common decision matrix. There are 4 quadrants: the urgent, the important, the non-urgent, and the non-important. Groups need a leader to decide which tasks go in which quadrant, what's a priority, what isn't. Where tasks go on this matrix and what gets prioritized is a difficult problem to solve for personal productivity, and it gets 10 times more complicated when you start applying it to large groups with multiple stakeholders, multiple people working in them. Andy Grove was the president of Intel. He wrote a book called High Output Management, which proposed the routes and methodologies to solving these management issues. At the end of the day, anything you're managing is just a combination of individual discrete parts. You have the elements that you have to ready to assemble those elements, and then you have to do a quality check at the end. For a YouTube video, it's writing the script, then filming, then editing, publishing that video. One person can't do everything concurrently. There are phases and gates to each step of a project. Let's say that you're managing a restaurant chain. You've got multiple elements that you have to juggle concurrently: eggs, toast, your coffee. You have to greet guests, and you have to assemble all of these discrete elements onto a plate on time and at a quality that the guests enjoy. Furthermore, there's an expectation that food comes out in a predictable schedule based on when people arrive. You have no idea how many people are coming, when they're coming, and what they'll be ordering. How do you coordinate this effectively? Grove proposes that you need to understand the underlying processes behind how your assembly line of breakfast actually works. Once you examine each of these steps, you can figure out how they actually relate to one another, the time sequence which each one has to happen. Can you start the toast in the toaster at the same time as you're frying the egg? Can you start the coffee even earlier? What's the order in the sequence, and how many people do you need to accomplish this task? Until you understand the base principles of what's actually happening, all the discrete elements and how they're organized, it's very difficult to manage them effectively. To do this, you need to consider 3 things: how to deliver all of these outputs on time, at an acceptable quality, and at an acceptable cost. This is an old project management maxim: time, money, or quality. Pick 2. Great management creates viable outcomes without compromising any of these variables too much for any of the stakeholders to handle, whether that's the customer, the company, or the workers. Let's look at the first variable. The most important thing to deliver items on time is to identify the limiting step of your process. The limiting step is the most time-intensive element, the thing that's going to cost the most time and energy. For the breakfast factory, the limiting step is the eggs. They're time-intensive, they're easily burnt, you need active management. The eggs are the core of what our breakfast factory is delivering. Since the limiting step determines the fastest amount of time that a process can possibly be done, we need to figure out what items can be done before, after, and concurrently. Once we've identified all elements, we can stagger them based on their proximity to the limiting step. Ideally, you'd be able to do all your tests concurrently, but sometimes you can't do that. For example, if you have to make multiple batches of eggs all at the same time, but you only have one pan, once the egg is identified as the limiting step, we can start to work our way backwards to determine how to coordinate with the other steps. When you start to break down processes this way, you can see them in everyday life. Even your morning routine is a process just like this, with a limiting step. You can batch some items together. For example, you can shower and shave at the same time, but you can't make your morning breakfast and shower and put your clothes on at the same time. But you can start the shower heating up while you're toasting your toast. Now for our second variable, a quality test. Even if you come up with the most efficient batch process, you still need to make sure it happens on time. Customers don't expect their eggs to appear in front of them right when they sit down, but they do expect it within a certain time and not to be burnt. One way to deal with this is a quality check. After each stage of the process is done, test for quality. Now, it's probably too onerous to put quality checks in at every single step of the process, so you want to put them just at key variable points. A good process will have various leading indicators that can be checked in case quality is going downhill in the middle of the process. You want to catch quality defects at the lowest stage of value. This means at the time where the least value has been baked into a product. For example, for a YouTube video, that's at the script script phase. It's hard to change a mostly final product, but a script can be modified and edited very easily. In the same way, you want to identify a spoiled egg before it's cooked, not afterwards. These indicators help you see into the black box of inputs and outputs in your production facility or your process. The third factor to manage is cost. So one way to solve all these problems is through redundancy. You can hire one person, a specialist for every single thing that's happening inside of your breakfast factory. Unfortunately, this creates overhead. Overhead is additional cost to operate your process. Another way that overhead's often created is by having additional resources or staff on hand, also known as inventory. Inventory is a backlog of available resources that can be deployed as needed. If you want to minimize quality disruption and maximize speed, having extra inventory is the way to go. However, you want the minimum possible inventory because inventory that is not used is expensive. And unfortunately, demand is lumpy. You won't always need the same resources at the same time, and you might be stuck with a lot of extra inventory. The manager must effectively manage all of these variables and make decisions for the team so that they're coordinated and effective at delivering outputs. Kinda hard. So, how do they do it? Grove identifies key ways that managers work. First, they consult their reports to determine trade-offs. This is good both for information gathering and for morale, as people want to know that they're being consulted and that their expertise is valued. Second, managers consult with their superiors and other stakeholders in the organization. This allows them to get buy-in, determine competing priorities, and update status. Additionally, managers are responsible for communicating to the team. This provides clarity of direction, alignment, and allows everyone to row their boats in the same direction. So what's the actual way that all of this happens? The answer? Meetings upon meetings upon meetings. It's almost impossible for a manager to complete these tasks, information gathering, buy-in, communication of decisions, on their own. No matter how you look at it, the greatest source of managerial strength is their leverage of their team. Once you perfectly understand all the component parts of your factory, your process, your team, what's next? Well, ultimately, things still break down. Why is that? Because people are involved. The ultimate limiting step to most of these interactions are people. Their energy, their understanding, their skill level. The one metric that really matters for a manager is how effective their team is at creating outputs. Andy Grove describes the single most effective way to lead a team: individual one-on-one meetings. Doing one-on-one meetings with your team members is pretty common advice, yet nobody does it. It's probably the single most common, important, but not urgent category on any manager's list, most regularly neglected. Meeting with employees one-on-one allows you amazing foresight into the future. You start seeing problems before they happen. You start solving problems before they even become problems. And most issues that plague managers seem utterly mysterious if you aren't doing one-on-ones. Those same problems would seem obvious and avoidable if you had just completed a one-on-one 3 months earlier. If you only take one thing away from this book, it is: do one-on-one meetings with your direct reports. This is probably the most efficient form of information gathering, quality checking, and keeping costs down by avoiding losing key employees. If you're adept enough to take 2 things away from this book, the second would be this: find your top process bottleneck, your limiting step that takes most of the time, most of the energy currently in your process. Figure out if you can automate that step, delegate that step, and start building your processes backwards. But once you solve this step, remember, when energy flows through a system and bottlenecks are unplugged, new bottlenecks are created at different portions of the business. And that's when you get to reassess, find the next bottleneck, and keep doing work. At the end of the day, it's not about you and your efficacy. It's about the efficacy of those you manage and helping them do their best work. And that's the secret to high output management.